Hello everyone, I'm Troy Dodds and welcome to the On The Record podcast presented by The Western Weekender. On this podcast I'm joined by special guests who all have such great stories to tell about Penrith and the role they've played in our city. They are Penrith stories told by Penrith people. Today my special guest is Warren Bird. Warren grew up in Penrith but it never really left him. He entered the finance industry, had a strong career in the sector and continued his passion for sport in particular and for Penrith. Warren, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
First question we always ask, where and when were you born?
Okay, so although I always say I came from Penrith, I was actually born a bit further west in Orange in central western New South Wales, way back in 1957. So I suppose since then it's become a bit of an extension of Penrith with Bathurst just down the road.
And of course you moved to Windsor, I think, when you were 5. So do you have much memories of that Orange kind of years, or is it mainly growing up in the Windsor kind of area?
Look, I have a lot of great memories of Orange because, I left when I was 5, so I've still got a few memories. I remember the day that everybody out there still talks about where it snowed on Christmas Day. That was in the early 60s, a very famous Christmas day out there. We used to go back from Windsor and Penrith out to Orange for Christmas and other times during the year. So I love Orange and I still go back out there from time to time, although most of the family that I used to visit are no longer there.
What about family? Mum, Dad, tell me about them.
Okay, yeah, so mum and dad both were country people, came from further out. Dad was born in Parkes and grew up in a tiny little place called Kadungle, which is really just a railway siding. There's a house and a silo there these days. And Mum came from just near Orange, and they both met working at the old Moran and Cato grocery store in Orange. And they built a house out there. But then, as you alluded to a minute ago, we moved to Windsor because I had an uncle, my dad's sister's husband, who could see that Mum and Dad had a really strong work ethic. And he spotted a little rundown milk bar in South Windsor that he believed was a really good bargain for them to buy into and turn into something. So when I was 5, we moved down to South Windsor. It was a real mess, the place that we moved into. There was a shop on the front on George Street in South Windsor and a house out the back. But my uncle believed that they could make something of it, and they did. And so that's probably the thing I would say in brief about my parents, is they just had an amazing work ethic. But they turned that rundown milk bar into a very, very popular spot for locals to come to. The kids' football teams would come there after their games for their milkshakes and that sort of thing. And I've even had people that I've met in the finance industry over the years who say, "Oh, Bird, were you related to the Birds who had that milk bar in South Windsor? That was a great place." So I'm very proud of what my parents achieved out there.
And of course, the milk bar sort of scene in the 60s was huge in Australia. In fact, it's something I guess a lot of people long for these days. They love those kind of old school milk bars and whatnot, and particularly when you got a good one.
Yeah, they were popular spots, and I have great memories because we had some family times there. Things like Friday nights when they'd shut the shop. They didn't have fish and chips, so we went up the road and got fish and chips, and we'd have fish and chips in the shop and let the budgerigar out to fly around the shop, and great memories.
You moved to Penrith in 1969, so your official time in Penrith begins. What are your memories of Penrith in the late 60s, early 70s, and why the move to Penrith?
Okay, well, we moved to Penrith, I think, because they'd made such a success of the shop that they were able to sell it for a good price, and they were mortgage free for the rest of their life, which was part of it. But also, I had one sister who moved from Orange to Penrith, but then there was another one on the way, and Mum and Dad just didn't fancy having another young child in that little house that we had in South Windsor, and so they sold the business and we moved over to Penrith, and I absolutely loved it. From the time we got there, I just had a ball, and I really was shaped and formed as the person that I am by living in Penrith. In many ways, it was really not much more than a country town back then. It was a little bit more, but not much more than a country town. And for me, it was just a massive big playground. Mum and Dad built a new house in, I think it was called the Penrith Park Estate. It's in South Penrith, but at the time there were a lot of empty blocks there, and so lots of new families, young kids like me, and we would just use those empty blocks after school every day to play soccer and cricket and just have a lot of fun. And we'd just be out there till after dark or till it got dark and we got called in for dinner. And, as you said about the milk bar scene, I think those sorts of experiences, being able to just get out and play safely with your neighbourhood friends, things that a lot of kids these days don't get to experience because it's too crowded and it's just not safe to let kids wander around too much.
Yeah, look, people we've had on this podcast in the past sort of talk about the 60s and 70s as kind of being that golden era of Penrith, in that it was sort of on the cusp of becoming the city. It was getting a bit busier, but it's just still had that real rural and country feel to it, and it was just a great place to grow up.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the symbols of that struggle or progression from country to city was the old STD phone code.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there was so much that was new going on then. And, we got our first landline telephone when we were in Penrith. We got our first colour television. They came in 1975, all that sort of thing. But Penrith used to be 047 and then the phone number, and we were outside the 02 Sydney code, and there was always a lot of political pressure. Why don't you stop the Sydney thing at the river rather than at St Mary's? And so eventually Penrith, of course, became part of Sydney. The Panthers had come in as well. They really gave some impetus to the whole thing. And also just south of where we lived, there was this massive cleared area that we used to go and kick a ball around on until the equipment came in and laid the asphalt that became the M4. So I think most Penrith people just think the M4's there, but we watched it being put in. We used to play on it until we couldn't play there anymore.
Yeah, well, these days, I guess we talk about how connected Penrith is. It's, you can get to the city in 35 to 40 minutes. When I was growing up, obviously the M4 was there, but it was still a much longer journey into the city. And back then, obviously, you were dealing with the Great Western Highway. So Penrith certainly wasn't as connected to the rest of Sydney as it is today.
No, that's right. And I'm glad about the connections because, as we'll talk about later, going to see the Panthers play, which is the main reason I still get out to Penrith. It's not a bad drive from here in the Sutherland Shire, in the Menai area, to get out there, except for those Friday night games where the traffic on the M4 gets a little bit heavy for a while.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
There was a lot of new things going on. So it was exciting to be in Penrith in the 70s for all those reasons. And my family, you asked about mum and dad. Well, mum especially really threw herself into the community. She helped form the Penrith South Netball Club that my two sisters played in. The eldest of my sisters, Karen, played in the team that won their first championship for Penrith South. There was an experienced team up in the lower Blue Mountains that won everything during the season, was expected to win the grand final easily, but my sister led her team to victory, an upset victory, so that laid a bit of a foundation. And mum was also then one of the founders and the charter president of the Nepean Valley Toastmistress, which has since been incorporated into the men's organisation as just Toastmasters. So very much involved in a lot of the things that happened.
Yeah, well, in fact, obviously around that era, so many of those organisations that we still kind of know of today started to form. And as you mentioned, the Panthers, of course, in 1967, just a couple of years before you moved to town, arrived. So tell me about falling in love with rugby league, because it was pretty tough to support the Panthers in the late 60s and early 70s.
It was. I mean, rugby league was the first sport I played. Late primary school, when I was still in Windsor, I played with the school team and actually got picked in the representative side that went up to Katoomba to play in a competition. I played second row. I was a ferocious tackler around the legs, like they used to teach you to do. Uh, but then in 1968, so we just sold the shop in Windsor and moved on, and we were sort of an interim in Richmond. And Dad, my younger sister had been born, and so Dad took me across to Penrith. We knew we were going to move there. The house was being built. He took me to my first game, July 68. They were up against the Balmain Tigers. They were performing really well, expected to win easily. But of course, back in those days, it was always a bit of a grudge match against Balmain because there were a lot of ex-Balmain players who helped form the initial first grade teams for Penrith, including the captain Bob Boland, and also the guy who won that particular match for Penrith with a field goal, Bob Mara. So it was a great day. I still also have memories of this guy who looked like he was drunk, wandering around, punching the air, cheering for the Tigers. And it was, of course, the famous old Laurie Nichols, who became pretty well known as a Balmain supporter. So saw him cheering the Tigers. They led most of the way, but there was great excitement when Bob Mara kicked that field goal and Penrith came out on top.
Absolutely. And of course, Penrith Park, obviously, you essentially grow up through your teen years going to Penrith Park. Plenty of memories, and obviously these days about to be, or is being rebuilt, but still great memories of that site, I'm guessing.
Yeah. I mean, I clearly just remember when there was just that concrete set of steps that passed as a grandstand on the western side, and used to sit up there. And a lot of the time there weren't too many people there. You didn't have to fight for a seat or pre-book or anything. You just turned up at the games and sat wherever you wanted to, and you could run on the field back in those days after the game. And I had this amazing autograph book that had Penrith and visiting players, Graham Langlands and Reg Gasnier, and as well as all the Penrith players. And I really wish I still had that autograph book. I do not know what happened to it somewhere along the line, but you could do that back in those days. But that's one of the things I love about the current Penrith team, is just the amount of time they spend down around the fence after the games, mingling with the fans, and letting them. They don't do autographs so much these days as selfies, but great memories from way back then.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What about school? Where did you go to school locally?
All right, so that was one of the other things that was brand new back then. I was in the second cohort of students to go through what was a brand new Kingswood High School.
Okay.
So, in fact, when I was in what's now called year 7, it was first form back then, the school buildings weren't finished. And so we got bussed down to Colleton High School for our lessons. We were in Kingswood High School uniforms, and we had only classes of Kingswood students, but we were located in another place. And it wasn't until around Easter in what's now year 8 that we moved to the campus on Bringelly Road up there in Kingswood. It was somewhat brutalist in its architecture. I think it still is. But I absolutely loved my time at school. I was quite academic. I really appreciated that the education department sent some very high quality teachers to Kingswood as a new school to help get it going, including the late, great Pat Sheehy, who went on to become Mayor of Penrith, who passed away last week. He headed up the science staff at Kingswood High back in those days, taught physics and chemistry, was just a lovely bloke. I really enjoyed being taught by him. He was a bit of a mentor in many ways. So, Kingswood was a terrific school back then, and I loved it. I became the school captain when I was in the final year there, and that was really something I was very proud of, to be able to play a leadership role at that time and encourage a lot of other students as well.
So I don't know if you've driven past the school lately, but obviously that area itself has grown pretty significantly too, right on the doorstep there of the Caddens development, of course, but back then it must have been more of that open space.
Oh, a lot of open space, a lot of empty ground around the school where we had our cross-country running and all of that sort of thing. So it was, like I said earlier, Penrith was a bit of a country town, but it was changing. And so, I haven't been up past Kingswood High for a while because Penrith Stadium's the other direction once I get onto Bringelly Road. So
Yeah, well, certainly an expanding area there, no doubt about that. You were big in debating in high school as well?
Yeah, Kingswood High, because of the type of school it was at the beginning, they put a lot of effort into public speaking and debating. We actually had one of the Toastmasters clubs come in and help us to form a junior Toastmasters called the Gavel Club. I don't think it's still going at the school, but at the time it was, I think, the first school-based Gavel Club in Australia or something. So that was fun. But yeah, the school was big in debating, in inter-school debating. The team the year ahead of me, the first cohort through, made the final of the year 11 Carl Cramp competition back in 1973. They were beaten by Port Hacking, but then we went one better in 1974. We beat Fort Street Boys along the way, which I felt really chuffed about because they were a very academic, selective school, and to beat them, bunch of hicks from Kingswood, was terrific. And then we beat Erina High in the final to become state champions. So really enjoyed my time as debating, and the couple of the other members of that team are still friends that I'm in regular contact with.
Yeah, okay, great. And sport, you mentioned rugby league, but I know you're into hockey as well and had some success there.
Oh, yeah. So, as I said, the other kids started getting a bit bigger than me around the end of primary school, so I gave up rugby league. But also in South Penrith, there were a lot of English migrants had moved in, and they were trying to form a soccer club. And I think the beginnings of it were in 1968, but in 1969 I joined Penrith South. It's now Penrith FC, I think. Soccer team, and started playing soccer, but I also played tennis and cricket, and then from year 9 onwards I played hockey. And the Kingswood High School boys A grade hockey team was a pretty good side. We had a lot of success. We won the Nepean District Schools competition 3 years in a row in my years 10, 11 and 12. We made the quarterfinals, I think it was, of the Wales Cup, the state championship, and yeah, we're a pretty good team. I just had to hang around on the right wing, and when I got the ball, flick it into our centre forward, who was a brilliant player, and he just did the rest. So I had the easy part, but I really enjoyed it. A few of our team got tried out for the state side. A couple of the others got selected, including that centre forward, but I missed out.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's, look, obviously, it's interesting, yet again, we talk about sort of the formation of some of the sports, around in that era, and they continue on today. What were you like at school? I know you ended up going into finance, but were you a maths whiz? Were you a great student? What kind of student were you?
Oh, yeah, I was a bit of a nerd, very academic. They'd picked that up in primary school, and so the teachers, really encouraged me. And back in those days, the way the higher school certificate was structured, we could focus on 4 level 1 subjects, the top subjects, and so I did that. A couple of years after I left, they stopped. They made you have a broader spectrum of subjects for the HSC, even if you were top students. But so I did 4 level 1s. Math, science, English, but economics was the subject that I really focused on. Commerce up to year 10, then economics, because that was where somewhere along the line I had a really great bloke who lived next door to us in South Penrith, who encouraged me to get involved or to head for the Treasury Department, because he said you can make a difference working in economic policy in Canberra. So that's where I was headed. So yes, I was a maths whiz. I loved science, but economics was what I really focused on.
So when did you finish school? What was your last year of school?
1975.
Okay.
So I did the high school certificate in 75. I was reminded of this just the other day because with the 50th anniversary of the dismissal of Gough Whitlam, I remember walking home after my level 1 maths exam, called in at the pharmacy there in Smith Street in South Penrith where Mum worked, and first thing she said to me was, "Goff's been sacked." And I thought, "You beauty, I get to vote for the first time." So yeah, 1975 I finished school and headed in. I stayed in Penrith through uni, but I went into Sydney University to study economics.
Yeah, okay. And so Sydney Uni, stay in Penrith, but so it's the late 70s that you leave Penrith, is that right? Or when do you finally
I ended up leaving in 1980. So I left Penrith just as the Panthers were starting to get their act together a little bit more. I think you asked me earlier about following Penrith back in the 70s, and I think the current fans got a bit of a taste of what that was like in the early part of the 2025 season we've just finished, when we were in last place. I mean, that was a regular occurrence back in the 70s, and I have to say, in 1973 I was there the day they became the 707s, when Manly Warringah beat Penrith 70-7.
Yeah.
And it was a low point in the club. I think the club realised that they needed to do something different, so they brought in two Englishmen, Mike Stevenson and the late great Bill Ashurst, in 1974, and they made Penrith a much more interesting team to watch. We had a little bit of success, made the final of that old midweek knockout cup, the Amco Cup, where we then had the embarrassment of being beaten by an amateur team from the Western Districts. But no, Steve-O and Bill Ashurst were great players, and they helped improve the culture of the team, and it started to improve. But, I saw the emergence of players like Des Hasler and Phil Gould and players like that had their debuts with Penrith back in those days. The great Kevin Dan was our first sort of rep player. Loved watching him play. So yeah, I had some great memories of watching Penrith in the 70s, even though they kept losing. They used to play a lot of 3:00 games on Saturdays and Sundays. So I'd go and watch my youngest sister play netball at Jamison Park, and then the two of us would go over and watch the Panthers play after that. And it was just good times, really good memories.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me about then, the 80s and 90s. You do enter the finance and the economics world, so your career and where it takes you.
Yeah, so after uni, I went to Canberra, worked a bit for the Bureau of Statistics, but then got into Treasury. I was there during interesting times like the floating of the Australian dollar and a few other bits and pieces. The Hawke-Keating era was really quite just beginning. But my wife and I started a family, and a whole other group of reasons came together, but we decided to move back to Sydney. And that's when I moved into the financial markets. A lot of opportunities then, because Paul Keating, as the treasurer, had deregulated the financial sector. There are a lot of opportunities for economists and financial analysts to work for international banks, and the Australian banks were expanding as well. So I left Canberra, we came back to Sydney, and I joined the finance sector. And that was... I had a really blessed career there. I ended up working for a US investment bank called Merrill Lynch, and that helped me travel the world. I was talking about what Paul Keating was up to, what was happening in Australia. Australia was a bit of a flavour of the month, or flavour of the decade, really, in international investment circles back then. And also the movie Crocodile Dundee had fueled a lot of just general interest overseas in what Australia was like. So I got to speak to audiences around the world about what was going on. So all that debating and public speaking that Kingswood High School had focused on came in really handy, because some of the audiences in Boston in particular were very intellectual, and you had to be pretty sharp to be able to deal with talking to them.
Yeah, obviously a really intriguing time, as you say, like politically in Australia, but just in Australia's growth in general, it kind of was really emerging to be a significant international player.
Yeah, and it was interesting just watching, when Hawke was elected, there was a lot of hangover in the US in particular after Gough Whitlam's period, and there was a lot of suspicion about Hawke. So I'd like to feel that I helped play my little part in telling people, no, these guys are actually genuine economic reformers. They believe the markets have a role to play. They're not going to sort of just run the budget deficit up and spend, and they were pretty well disciplined at the time, and so yeah, it was a great. There was a lot of interest in Australia, and it was a great time to be able to be telling what were some very positive stories about Australia. Although I tended to be a very balanced sort of picture person. There was one big fund manager in London once told me that they listened to Don Stammer from Bain and Company to get a positive view of the world. Another guy to listen to a pessimistic view, and me to get the balanced view. So I quite like filling that slot.
And you did pick up a bit of a media sort of role around those times as well. You were doing a bit of media, people seeking out your opinion and views.
Yeah, that's right. The Merrill Lynch encouraged me to do that, to have good contacts with journalists. I got to know Ross Gittins from the Sydney Morning Herald pretty well around that time. But it also led to a very interesting and memorable integration of my career with my love of the Panthers, because that media profile led me to become a guest one night on a show that only lasted a year or two, Andrew Denton's Live and Sweaty. Okay. The ABC's on Friday night. So a humorous look at the world of sport. I don't know if you ever saw it. But,
no, I don't remember that one.
As I said, it was only on for a year or two. And on the Friday night before the 1991 grand final, I was invited to be a guest on the show. I was one of a panel of people whose profession was to predict the future somehow. And so we had to use jargon from our profession to predict the grand final result. So it was all meant to be, good fun and not too serious. And so there are a few other people gave their predictions. They were all going for Canberra, the clairvoyant and the tarot card reader and the weatherman and all that sort of thing. And then Andrew Denton got to me, and I just leaned forward and said, well, Andrew, this is the grand final we had to have. It pits the victims of the recession from Penrith against its instigators in Canberra. And I went on to use the level of interest rates at the time to predict that Penrith would win the game 17-12.
Well, very close.
And at the game I went to that grand final that year, and at the game when Royce scored that magnificent second try of his, and the score was 17-12. For a brief moment, I thought, do I want Brandy to kick this conversion or not? But no, it was only a momentary thought. I was cheering as loud as anyone when it went through, and we had that unbeatable 7-point lead, and the premiership was ours.
Yeah, well, that's quite a unique twist back into Penrith and whatnot that you went through there. That's a cool story. What about how much changed over your career in terms of economics? And I guess, you would have been involved in huge tech changes, particularly around Australia and how connected it was, but just in general as well, the huge technology shift we would have experienced through the late 90s in particular.
Yes, I experienced that firsthand because, as I said, I was at Merrill Lynch in the late 80s into the 90s, and even back then, if you worked for those sorts of organisations, you were at the cutting edge of communications technology. And so we went through a process of installing these trading systems that had multiple screens where you were getting live feeds of prices and interest rates from all over the world, and news sources, Reuters and other news sources. CNN was just starting to come on, so we got a television and we were able to tune into CNN. And one of the biggest memories of that being really helpful was when they bombed Iraq as the start of the first Gulf War. We saw it on television, and started ringing our clients, and a few of the clients were saying, "Oh, we're waiting for confirmation. It's just a rumor at this stage." And we said, "No, it's not. We're watching it live on television."
Yeah.
And so just having that technology meant that we had a bit of an advantage and knew exactly what was going on. And it's just gone from there. And yeah, technology kept changing. And, one of the issues we're dealing with now, in one of the part-time roles that I have these days, on the board of a super fund, we've got topics all the time about what do we want to do with AI? How do we manage the introduction of artificial intelligence and the information and search capacity that can bring? So, yeah, incredible changes in technology through my career.
I mean, I'm guessing that when you first started, you wouldn't have even had a computer on the desk, is what I'm thinking.
Actually, I had at the end of my time in Treasury,
Yeah.
was the first time that they had little desktop computers.
Yeah.
And I remember for a couple of years, I went to what's now called the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, where the state treasurers and the federal treasurer get together. It was a premier's conference back in those days. And it was always this argy-bargy where the states would put up a suggestion about a change to a spending formula, and you'd go away for hours and, they work out what that meant. And the states used it as a stalling tactic. But this particular year, I think it was 1984, we had Lotus 1, 2, 3 in these dedicated desktop things. And so we were actually able to say, okay, we'll take that on board. And we had a guy who knew how to run it. So he went into Lotus 1, 2, 3, spat out the number of, change this and it means an extra $20 million or whatever, and went back in 5 minutes. And the states just didn't know what was going on at the time. And if you actually go to the old Parliament House in Canberra these days and do the tour there, you will see those types of desktops sitting on the desk, because they shut old Parliament House down and they've kept it as it was back in those days. So when I went back there a few years ago, it was a real blast from the past to see these little computers.
Yeah. When did you finish full-time work? When and was it a conscious decision to retire, or the circumstances? What eventuated?
Well, I went from that investment banking environment into funds management, and I joined a little company that was part of the State Bank of New South Wales in 1997, and I therefore was privileged to be on one of the great corporate rides in Australian history, because that little company became Colonial First State,
right,
the biggest fund manager in the country, and I ran the fixed income investment team, and we went from having about $1 billion under management to 60 billion in over a few years, and were the biggest in the country. And I guess a lot of the listeners would have some funds with Colonial, or at least will have heard of them or seen their ads. So that was an exciting time. Companies change. It was time to move on. I had 16 wonderful years there. I have worked. I left there in 2013. I have worked full-time since. I ran the Treasury and Investment area for the Uniting Church in New South Wales for 6 or 7 years. But yeah, then I was getting close to being 65 and just decided that I wanted to slow down. And so I'm very much semi-retired these days. Yeah.
Yeah, you say semi-retired because you have stayed well connected to the industry through different boards and committees and all sorts of things. Was that something you really wanted to do?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to stay connected because I think, it's interesting. There's so much talk in the superannuation industry these days about preparing people for retirement and that. And it's not just about the money. You actually have to think about what's going to happen to your lifestyle and your brain and your level of engagement with the community. And I remember years and years ago, there was a guy who was the chief economist at Westpac, a guy called Bill Evans, who a lot of people will have heard of. And Bill told me one time that he had so many friends who retired early because they had enough money to retire. But he said, these are guys who used to know what was happening in the world, and now all they can talk about is their golf handicap.
Yeah.
He said, don't you ever be like that.
Yeah.
And so that has that has sort of stayed with me. That was a bit of sage advice. And so, yes, I knew that when the time came to leave full-time work, I wasn't going to go cold turkey on not working at all. And fortunately, I'd picked up a role as an independent member of the investment committee of the Western Australian Government Employees Super Fund, GESB. One of my old bosses from Treasury days was the boss of GESB in Perth, and he asked me to join. And then when I finished full-time work, I stepped up to become a member of the board and chair their investment committee. So that's a really great role. I'm enjoying very much being part of the current debate about retirement income strategies and how super funds can better look after people as they approach retirement and then when they're in retirement. So that takes up a lot of our time, and it's just really important. I mean, I've always believed that my engagement with the finance sector was all about helping people live better lives. The finance side of their life was really important, especially at Colonial First State. That was the culture of the firm. We were there for the clients. We were there to help them be better off, and that's stayed with me, and it's one of the reasons that I love being involved with the super fund, and also because I now live mostly down at Kalala Beach on the south coast. I got involved a couple of years ago with the local health district down there, so I chair the audit and risk committee for them. So those two jobs probably take up about 25 to 30% of my time and just keep me actively engaged.
Yeah, and it's great too, because obviously you spent a lifetime in the sector, so you don't want to be completely lost to it, and you don't want to lose connection with it either. Tell me about family, wife, kids.
Yep, no, very important question. Absolutely adore my wife. We met at the in between finishing uni and moving to Canberra. We met on a thing called Beach Mission. I think some of the listeners might have seen the groups that run activities for kids and families in the caravan parks up and down the coast during the summer. So we were at East Beach at Kiama doing a reach out to teenagers at the time. We got on incredibly well. She lived at Narooma. I was moving to Canberra, and she told me that lots of Canberra people travel over to Narooma for weekends and that. If I ever wanted to pop over, please call in. I did, and she couldn't get rid of me. And so a few months later, we got engaged, and we got married a year or so after that, and we're about to celebrate our 45th wedding anniversary.
Wow!
So she's been a huge part of my life, and don't know where I'd be without her. But she grew up in the St George area in Peakhurst. So when we started our family and decided to move back to Sydney, we moved closer to Peakhurst. So hence I'm in the Menai area at the moment, and didn't move back to Penrith.
Yeah. Okay. Well, her loss not coming back to Penrith, I reckon. But
she's not a sports fan, really. She's been to a couple of Penrith games, including the last one she went to was a beauty, because the day Nathan came back against the Dolphins and kicked that field goal last year was also my dear old auntie's 90th birthday. And she'd said, I'm having my 90th at a Panthers game. So we were at that Dolphins game and then went over to the club for a bit of a party afterwards. Dylan Edwards was beautiful. He made a video wishing her a happy birthday and all that sort of thing. Gee, he's a good bloke. Anyway, Desmond came to that game with me, so even she was excited when Nathan kicked the field goal.
Absolutely. And what about kids?
So we've got two kids. So the daughter was born when we were still in Canberra, but was very young when we moved back up here. And a few years later, a son, so one of each. They're obviously both adults now, both married with their own kids. My daughter has two little boys. They live up on the northern beaches of Sydney, and my son lives out at Picton. He has one little boy, and they have another one on the way that we're hoping gives us a girl. But
nice.
they're
And
all,
did they follow you into the finance and economic sectors, or?
no, they didn't. At least they followed me as Panthers fans. So back in 2011 and 12, when my daughter was still at home, we were members out at Penrith together and went out to all the games. And I saw a different side of my daughter at those games when she was screaming her head off and screaming abuse at the refs and all that sort of thing. That was good fun. But no, they didn't follow me into finance. Daughter became a childcare worker, although since she's had her own family, she's just been a home-based mother, looking after them. And my son was a chef for 20 years. He came down the stairs one day and said, when he was 14, said, I'm going to be a chef. We thought, oh, okay. Then we saw Jamie Oliver on television. We thought, now we know why. He really related to him. So he was a chef for 20 years, but he gave that up about 18 months ago, just around the time his little son was born, because he wanted to be able to put him to bed. And also his wife is a wedding planner, so she works on weekends. Marmalade Sky, put in the plug there.
Yep.
And so he wanted to be able to be home on weekends to look after the boys. So he's now in commercial property management. So quite a career shift for him.
Yeah, absolutely. Now you mentioned you get back to Penrith fairly often, which is great to see the boys obviously in action. What about changes in the city? Like, you must have, each time you come back, probably another restaurant's opened or another building's changed or a road's been upgraded. It's been pretty significant over your years coming back to Penrith.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, and I came back a lot until sort of the mid to late 90s when Mum and Dad retired and they moved back to Orange. Why you would retire to Orange where it's so cold and all that, I don't know, but Orange was special to us. That's where they grew up. So they retired back there. So my visits became less frequent, and these days it really is only when I'm going out to see the Panthers. So anything between, the M4 turn off there on Bringelly Road and getting to Penrith. But yeah, I mean, that shopping centre down the end of Grandview Street where we used to live in South Penrith, South Side or whatever it's called, that's just got bigger and bigger. Well, that wasn't there when I left, and so that's got bigger and bigger. And yeah, the place has just filled up a lot more. I mean, all those empty blocks of land that we played soccer on when I was a kid have got houses on them now. But Jamison Park's still there. The field between Jamo and Penrith Stadium is still empty.
Yes, for a little while longer at least.
You used to be able to park in there, but I haven't seen cars parked in there for a long time. So there's still a bit of room for it to move. And of course, Panthers Club has just been incredible the way it's grown. It was, I mean, I still remember the little old club up in the main part of the town on the corner there, which
on Station Street,
Roger Cowan back in his days, and then of course they moved across the road from Penrith Park. The restaurants out there, they're always changing. Good club though. I enjoy. I've popped over to the club quite often, especially with my auntie. As I say, my auntie, my cousin, and I were members in 22, 3, and 4 out there. So we were out there a lot, and we went to the club for dinner and seeing the Pullman and all those other buildings. Yeah, incredible amount of change. Penrith definitely deserves to be regarded as part of Sydney these days. It's not a country town. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, look, Warren, a great story in terms of career and whatnot, but some great memories of Penrith, which is obviously what we're all about. What would you like to see for Penrith in the future as a place you grew up and loved so much?
Well, it'll be interesting to see how the new airport changes the way the rest of the world interacts with a place called Penrith. I mean, I share your absolute cynicism about the amount of concerts that'll be at the new stadium and all that sort of thing. I was thinking the other day when I listened to the last Tensions Running High podcast, you should when you're in Nashville, you should try and get that Alan Jackson guy to come out of retirement and come and do something at Penrith.
I'm sure he's heard of it.
That'll be interesting, but it'd be good if that succeeds. I mean, it's easy to be really cynical and say, oh, it's not going to work, but I would hope it succeeds and that it can become, a real hub for a lot of visitors to come to Penrith, and use it as a more of a starting point for travelling further west, going up to the Blue Mountains, going out to Orange. I love Orange wines. I think the wineries out there are superb. So Penrith is a base for touring out there, but above all, I guess I just hope that the Panthers just keep on succeeding. I mean, compared to the 70s, I think the last 12 seasons we've made the finals 10 years, and of course have been in prelims and grand finals, in the recent seasons. When Penrith came into the comp back in '67 was the beginning of that South Sydney era where they won 4 premierships in 5 years. And all through the 70s, I thought, when is Penrith going to have a club like that?
Yeah.
Well, we've got there, and I actually think we're doing better than that. As I said, 10 years out of 12 we've been in the final. So it's Penrith and Melbourne are the successful clubs. And I just hope that continues, and that in 5 years' time, when there's no Dylan Edwards, no Nathan Cleary, no Isaiah Yeo, because they've all retired, that we're still cheering for the next generation of players that come through. And I think they're trying to manage that transition at the moment pretty well. They know who to let go. They're great at giving players opportunities, but they also are great at being able to say, look, we've given you some opportunities. You haven't quite hit the nail on the head. And I think just about all the ones they've let go at the end of this season fit that category. Yeah. So if that culture can continue, then we can continue to have success.
100%. All right. Well, the last question we always ask to wrap things up: how would Warren Bird like to be remembered?
Well, as a Christian, I'd mostly like to be remembered as someone who was authentic and faithful in all walks of life. But that faithfulness includes being faithful to your roots. And so in the context of our chat today, I hope that wherever I've lived and whatever I've done and continue to do, that Penrith and Kingswood High School will be proud of me, because I'm proud to say that that's where I came from.
Well, I reckon there's no doubt about that. Warren, thank you so much for sharing your story and some great memories of Penrith.
My pleasure. Thanks, Troy.
And I hope you enjoyed our chat with Warren. On the Record is produced by The Western Weekender. To hear future episodes, search Western Weekender wherever you listen to podcasts, and make sure you hit subscribe. Check out westernweekender.com.au, download the Western Weekender app, and we'll see you next time.